Hi everyone, and welcome to U.S. History 110. This is our first unit, Exploration of the New World. Now, for U.S. history, we start recording the time frame in 1585 when our Spanish explorers come into South and Central America. However, as we know, that there were people groups here well before the 1500s, and so that's where we're actually starting today. Is we are starting with the native populations that were in these areas when the explorers came across the Atlantic. The reason that, even though this is technically a part of U.S. history and American history, is because a lot of the histories from these tribes were oral histories, and so it's passed down through generations, and then when we have our explorers come in and try to assimilate these tribes or totally wipe them out by genocide or by introducing new diseases, we lose a lot of the history and we lose a lot of the understandings of these tribes. So a lot of this is just coming from some of the missionaries that are based in these nations who do take the time to get some written histories down. Because of the oral tradition of history and record keepings in these native tribes, we don't particularly have an exact number of the populations. So what the estimate is by historians is that pre-1500, throughout North, South, and Central America, the population is estimated to be 112 million. As we see throughout time, and even those in these tribes that have still survived with the oral traditions and then the writings of the missionaries and those who took time to get some of the history down, this is where that estimate comes from. And again, it is just an estimate. We're really not sure, but this is probably a very safe estimate. Numbers could have possibly been higher. If we look at the population that is recorded in 1800 after the conquistadors and other settlers have moved into these nations and have committed the genocides that we have seen, our population number is reduced to 600,000. A lot of this is going to be your North American tribes. Not a lot of tribes survive in Middle America and what is historically Mesoamerica. Our Aztecs, Incas, and the Mayans, those tribes are completely wiped out by the 1800s. Today's contemporary population of native tribes in the Americas, again, this is including North, Central, and South America, is about 5 million. So this number has greatly increased. Obviously, this number may not be completely both parents being natives. This could be a mother is a native, father is Caucasian, or whatever, however that may work out. But they are counted with the native populations. Of these 5 million, 78% live outside of a reservation. So that is a lot higher number than what we were seeing in the early 1900s, especially when students were being forced to go to these assimilation schools and things like that. But that is a conversation for History 120. So before the explorers, this is how our Americas were distinguished. We had South America, Mesoamerica, and North America. So on this map here, we're going to start with our Meso and our Southern American nations. So if we are looking at our map here, this area here That's an awful sound, sorry. Would be the land of the Incas, with the main region that the ruler of them, I'm going to make sure I get this correct, would be right here. This is the capital city, the capital area, his main territory, but this would be the Incan Empire. For our Mesoamericas, our Aztec nation is going to be on the Pacific side of Mexico. And then here on the Yucatan Peninsula, we have the Mayans. As we go about, you will see the reason that our Mayans and Aztecs are first hit with our explorers is because when they come in through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, these are the first people groups that they're going to interact with. You have the Amazon rainforest, the Amazon River, and dense forest areas here as well, protecting the Incas a little longer. So they are able to establish their country and establish themselves a little further into the 1500s than the Aztecs and the Mayans are, but eventually they are reached by Spanish conquistadors and are essentially wiped out as well. So our southern civilization, that of the Incas, mainly is set up in the what is contemporary Peru in South America. Pachuchi is their leader. This is one of the most feared leaders of the time, and for several reasons. The Incas will become the largest civilization in the Americas, again for the reason of being able to stay away from our explorers for longer. Because our leader is so feared, his empire will grow to be about 2,000 miles in South America. He would use persuasion instead of force to have other tribes join in, but mainly because it was best to be an ally of the Incas than to be an enemy. And if you are an enemy of them, you're going to be taken over anyway, so it's better to just go ahead and make treaties. And this is how his empire gets to be so big. They have an innovative administrative system, so the capital city would be where governors and senators from these other nations and from these other tribes would come together and get their instructions from the chief. And then they also had paved road systems, which obviously they are some of the first. And so we definitely see some of the innovation that occurs when they are left alone by the explorers before the 1500s are finished out. So our southern civilizations going into Mesoamerica, which contains Mexico and Central America, we have the Omelec Society, which is the first true complex society of the native Mesoamerica tribes. It emerges around 1000 BCE, is the earliest recordings we have of anything with the Olmec society. And then our Mayan culture. They would have several innovations with having a written language, a numerical system, an accurate calendar, or maybe not so accurate since obviously the world did not end in 2012. They would have advanced architectural systems, including using what we also see in Mesopotamia, in the Middle East, with channels to get water to crops and things like that. And then they would have important trade routes. Obviously, being right there on the Yucatan Peninsula, they have a very good fishing economy, and so they use that to their trade routes. They will take some of those resources that they get from fishing and take it inland. The picture here is of some of the Mayan ruins in Central America. Some of you all, if you all have went on cruises with your parents or whatever, you may have seen and been able to climb some of these and had some of those historical understandings of what this looked like, what it looks like today. Then we move on to our Aztecs, which are centralized in Mexico, is what it is called for the history then. Our main city is where a population of 1 million by the year 1500 will be residing. This is contemporarily seen as the complete population of the Aztecs. They obviously had overtaken other tribes, and so this is where that will come into play. That's where this number comes from. But they are our largest society in Mesoamerica, but because of the land size of the Incas, they will eventually take over the Aztecs and be the largest civilization, and mainly because they have longer times to grow their populations and their empire. The Aztecs were very advanced. They would have aqueducts, just as we would see in ancient Rome. They had public buildings, so they had a witch doctor's office. They had a courthouse. They had a jail and government buildings. And they would also have schools, mainly for the young men, but some of the women and children were women and young girls were educated on certain things so that they could be useful to the tribe. The Aztecs would have an organized military, so this would be, instead of a call go out for a battle or to take over a tribe, all of the young men get their weapons and go out. It would be in units and with certain people going and being in charge. They would have a medical system, midwives to help with the birthing process. They did have doctors, more of the witch doctors, of course. However, it was still a somewhat organized system. The majority of the workforce for the Aztecs would come from a slave base, from tribes that the Aztecs would defeat in battle, and they would offer death or slavery. And so that's where a lot of this comes to. They also had a system of tribute or taxes. So this would be brought to the main city, taken to the courthouse of the Aztecian buildings, and it would be based on how much land you owned, how many people lived in your household, things like that. So it was basically a tax system. The one thing that is interesting about the Aztecs that is a little different than most of the southern civilizations is that they are one of the main tribes that have a religion based on human sacrifice. So there are several recordings throughout history of human sacrifice, or these witch doctors taking hearts out of live people to then sacrifice to the Aztec gods. And again, here on this picture is some of those ruins that are left in Mexico. And this helps us understand how these cities were set up, what these buildings look like, and what possibly could have been housed in these buildings. So then moving on, we also are going to talk about, now we're moving into our northern civilization. So this map here shows you what type of tribes we had in North America and where they were housed. Agricultural, hunting, fishing, hunting and gathering. So you have this map that shows you what type of tribes were in what places in North America. And then this tribe map is showing you what the names of those tribes were. And they were separated into these certain areas like the Southwest, Southeast, Eastern Woodlands, Great Plains, and it was kind of like they would have regional governments. So the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, they would all come together and discuss what the lands were going to be doing, where these tribes were going to be living, setting those boundaries, and the same for the Eastern Woodlands. And then whoever this representative would be from the Southeast would go and meet with the Eastern Woodlands tribe representatives. And so it was a very intricate system. So here we have put both maps here together because I want you to kind of see this is going to help you with your quiz and some of your other information that you're going to be needing later on, is comparing these two maps to know which tribe was what type of tribe. So you can see, obviously, the Eastern Woodlands, they are mostly agricultural tribes. The Great Plains, they are hunting tribes. Once you get over into the California and Southwest, you have hunting-gathering tribes. And then on the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts, you obviously have your fishing tribes. So being able to use these two maps to compare which tribes were what type of tribe is going to be beneficial later on in the course. So again, we have 4 types of tribes: hunter-gatherer, agricultural, hunting, and fishing tribes. Now, here's some of the distinctions between this. So hunter-gatherer tribes, they are going to be focused on like natural berries and small game. So they do hunt, but they're not hunting big animals, big items or anything. They're hunting smaller game, maybe deer, mostly squirrel, rabbits, etc. Our agricultural tribes, These tribes are focusing on crops. They have permanent settlements. They do not move around. They focus on crops. They focus on raising animals for meat. They still hunt, obviously, but mainly deer and then smaller game. Our hunting tribes, these are your most mobile tribes. When you are watching Western movies or any depiction of native tribes from this era, and you see those riding on horseback and hunting buffalo and big game of the Great Plains, and they are living in teepees, this is the type of tribe that they're talking about, is the hunting tribes. So these, they focus on following the herds. This could be obviously buffalo herds, it can be herds of deer, anything like that. Any type of animal that is going to migrate and rotate in the Great Plains area, those hunting tribes are going to follow them. And then obviously our fishing tribes, pretty self-explanatory. They're going to focus on fishing. But it's not just for fish. This is also for sea mammals. That's not how you spell mammals. I apologize. So with this, you will see families who will be whalers. You have families who will hunt for seal, sea lions, etc. They have semi-permanent means of housing because, yes, they have a centralized town that they come to and stay at, but then they have to go out to fish and then come back inland. Same thing with the hunter-gatherer tribes, semi-permanent when it's time for the hunting season and for the hunters to go out, they will take temporary shelter with them and not come back to the main tribal grounds until their hunting is done. So these are some of the example of our permanent and semi-permanent housing. This here is an example of a Cherokee house that is built on tribal lands in the Appalachian Mountains. You can see it's obviously very permanent. A wooden door, it has a wooden frame. The dome shape of the house makes sure that in winter the heat rises and it comes back down into the house, so it's recirculating that heat. Same thing with our igloo houses of our northern Pacific tribes, like the Eskimos. They have those domed houses again, so the fires inside just rotate the heat. Then here we have our cliff dwellers, or the Pueblo of the Southwest. So they, to beat the heat and for their semi-permanent housing, they would carve out lands into the mountains, and then when they went out to gather or when they went out for hunting, they would have some semi-permanent tents and teepees that they would use. For the Pueblo, that would look a little bit like this, because as they are out hunting, they will have kind of a campsite, and then they'll go out and they'll come back and they'll do that several days. So it's a little more permanent, a little more structurally sound, and they want it to last a few days. Whereas our hunting tribes are classic looking teepees that we have seen made from buffalo skins and deer skins, and it's all just wrapped around and can be easily and quickly taken apart and put on a back of a horse or on the back of a young woman or young man to carry to the next spot that they are going to be camping. So this is the semi-permanent hunting teepee, and then this is our hunting tribe's shelter. And now comes the fun part. Our Europeans start to look westward. There are 4 reasons why Europeans will want to cross the Atlantic. The first is God. They feel, a lot of Europeans feel, that it is their responsibility to spread Christianity. And once it is discovered that there are people groups there, this is one of, in the West, this is one of the reasons. It's not the main reason, but it's the one that is most talked about in Europe to kind of justify the means of these explorations and things like that. Gold. Obviously. This is to increase trade and commerce. One thing that the early Spanish explorers will find is that in Mesoamerica, there's a lot of gold. And so if you can claim this free gold for your country or for yourself, then it increases your trade and your commerce. And it's not like our systems now. It's not like they had paper bills that were backed by a gold standard or anything like that. The more gold you had, the wealthier you were. So when gold is found in Mesoamerica, this becomes a high motivator for explorers. There's also this idea of glory. At this time, Spain and England are kind of battling right at each other for control over Europe, and so this is kind of name and claim. My colonies are bigger than your colonies. So the more colonies that you have under your name, the more wealthy you're going to be, the more land you have to exploit for commerce and trade, and then this also helps with determining who has the most power in Europe. And then we also have growth. So following the Black Plague, there is a baby boom in Europe. And just like the Schoolhouse Rock song says for westward expansion in the colonies, everybody needs a little elbow room. And so Europe is getting very crowded and it's becoming very unsanitary again. And so you cross the Atlantic and you have wide open spaces to increase your family, to increase the population of your country, which then goes back to glory, and having that name and claim. Then you also have your increase of commerce, and then ultimately to spread Christianity. So now, pardon me, get out of your portrait, Sir Columbus. We move into our explorers. And what their main goal is, what they intend to accomplish, and all of that. So Christopher Columbus is actually an Italian, but he will sail mostly for Portugal because they are the ones who will fund his expeditions. He originally sold the idea of his explorations as finding a way to reach Asia by going west, because going under Africa to get to Asia was very dangerous because of pirates. And then trying to go down the spice trade road was also very dangerous because of pirates and the Middle Eastern nations along the way that had tolls along the way, and how expensive it was becoming, and it was just not as profitable to use those two forms of transportation to try to get to Asia. So Christopher Columbus says, I can sail west, and eventually I will come around the globe and I will get to China from the west, not knowing that there is land in the way. Not a lot of people believed that the Americas were there, but this is what we have. So in 1492, Queen Isabella of Spain will give support for a westward journey. She will give him the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria. And in August of 1492, 10 weeks after he was supposed to reach his target of Asia, he would finally land in Japan. Or at least that's what he thought. He actually reached the Bahamas. And as he travels around these little nations of Japan, he reaches what he believes is China. But it's actually Cuba. He returns to Spain in triumph with captured Indians to prove where he had been. The name Indian is coined because he believed he had reached the West Indies. Obviously, he had not. So even us calling native tribes Indian tribes today is very culturally unsound, because they were not West Indians. They were native tribes of the Americas, so they were Americans. Once he has returned with this triumph, then he is sent on 2 more expeditions. His second expedition, he will look through the Caribbean and other smaller islands there in the Caribbean Sea. And then on his third expedition, he will reach the northern coast of South America. And it is at this point that he believes and realizes that he is not in the West Indies, but that he has found an entirely new country. So the famous conquistadors, they will claim all of the New World as their own and claim it for Spain. These men are the ones who will come with Columbus in his second expedition, and they will stay and they will start to conquer the lands around Mesoamerica and the Caribbean. Their first colonies and colonists will settle in the Caribbean on the island there. And our first conquistador is in 1518, Hernando Cortez. He would lead 600 men into Mexico to face Montezuma, and this becomes the main issue, and what will lead Cortez to victory is that they give smallpox to the Aztecs when they reach the capital city. Cortez establishes the reputation of being the most brutal conquistadors, which in Spanish means conquerors. He would go throughout these native tribes saying that it was the will of God that the Aztecs were given smallpox, and it was to show that he was a chosen conqueror and was chosen to take over these lands. Francesco Pizarro will conquer Peru eventually, and he is the one who uncovers the Inca's wealth, and then this is when South America becomes highly invaded by Spanish explorers and colonists. And then Francesco Coronado will travel into New Mexico, from Mexico and into the Northern American territories. So when we look at what Spanish America would come to, it's based on 3 different ages. The first is the age of discovery and exploration. So this is in the 1500s, 1520s to be a little more precise. The conquistadors will yield 10 times the gold and silver of the world's mines combined. Because they find so much wealth, this ends up making Spain the wealthiest country in the world. The second age is the age of conquest. This is when a military is established and they are going to dominate the natives. That is the key theme of the Age of Conquest. During the Age of Conquest, profits begin to shift to agriculture. The New World provides something that Europe had lost a long time ago due to increased farming and the use of crop fields, and that is soil that grows. And it grows things well, it grows them quickly and to the full, and so there's a lot of profit in agriculture for these new nations. They will also establish European civilizations. So this is when our first colonists and colonies and fortresses and things like that will start, and towns will start to be created. Missionaries will be brought into these civilizations to try to reach the natives and things like that. And in this point, they also will establish Catholicism in America. Simply put, if native tribes wanted to be left alone, they would have to agree to be loyal to Spain and to convert to Catholicism from whatever pagan religion that they were a part of. And then we have the Ordinance of Discovery. This is a slight change from the other two ages, because what we see is a little bit of morality. In the Ordinance of Discovery, the Crown will ban brutal military conquest. Because of this, they will expand their presence in the U.S. because what happens is, instead of going in and committing genocide of native tribes, they send in the missionaries to try to convert these tribes to be Spanish citizens. So it expands the presence of the Spanish. Even though the Crown will ban the brutal military conquest, it's kind of one of those like, a day late and a dollar short, because by this time the Spanish Crown had already taken over quite a lot of American territory in Middle America and even in the South North American tribes. So what does this look like for the Spanish in North America? The first permanent European settlement in the U.S. is in 1565, when St. Augustine is established in Florida. And this is a picture of St. Augustine. You all may have been there. The points are very militaristic in style to keep ships from having as little of cannon fire range as they possibly can. It is basically a military outpost in Florida. It's used as an administration center for missionaries who are trying to move north into Georgia and Alabama, what we now know as Georgia and Alabama. It's headquarters for a campaign against the northern natives, and this is where these tribes, this is where the troops will be established. And in 1598 in New Mexico, Don Juan de Onta will create Santa Fe. He will found it in 1609, but he will have moved into the area in 1598, going against the Pueblos in New Mexico. The Spanish aren't the only ones to move into the Americas. Now we're moving to North America, and this is where we're getting into our European nations that we know a little more about. So the French and the Dutch in America, they will establish a trading post in 1608 in Quebec in Canada. Du Bois is an adventurous fur trader and trapper, and where his success will come from is that he will create a positive relationship with the natives, and this will secure the French's place in America. He would trade them guns and money and horses and other goods if they helped bring in fur for his trade and for his trapping. So Quebec is the first French permanent settlement in North America. And then in 1624, we have New Amsterdam, which is established by Henry Hudson. He comes down the Hudson River in between Canada and what is now the U.S. and will encourage a mixture of Dutch settlers to come to New Amsterdam. He encourages German, Sweden, and Finland to establish as well outside of New Amsterdam. Interesting enough, so if Henry Hudson on what is now the Hudson River comes down and establishes New Amsterdam, I want you all to think about what that city is most likely named now and where we're talking about. Think it over and discuss it with your teacher. And then the English arrive. John Cabot in 1497 is the first documented explorer for the English. He is also Italian, and so even though he is representing the English, he is Italian. He had to transform internally before new settlements could succeed. This was more based on how the English wanted to settle North America. A lot of the serf class in England was being left homeless as there was a shift from tenant farming to sheep farming. And so England was saying, hey, if you volunteer to go to the New World and establish a settlement, we will take you out of serfdom, out of servitude, and give you land if you stay there for however many years. However, because of this, then you start to see a little bit of internal conflict because everyone's there not for the crown and not for the creation of a organized and collective colony. They're there just for their own freedom, and they're not team players. And so this is where a lot of the early establishments of the English have their issues. There's also a commercial incentive in establishing themselves in North America. There were a lot of exotic goods that could be changed for wool, and then the wool was sold in high demand as well. So they would get these exotic goods from North America, sell it for wool, and then the wool would also sell high. So it was like a double serving, I guess is a good way of describing it. So because of the commercial incentives, the charter companies began to take expeditions and take colonists and try to create these semi-permanent colonies. And the most famous is the East India Trading Company, and they will become one of the most diabolical as well. And all of this is under the idea of mercantilism, that economic activity would be increased by a country's total wealth. So if a country becomes wealthier, then the economy becomes wealthier as well and runs better, and there's more economic activity because there's more money flowing into the nation. And then there was a religious incentive, and this is where for English settlements and for what we start to teach about in elementary school with the Pilgrims and the Puritans, this is the religious incentive. European and English reformers are wanting to be ardent Protestants, and so the Puritans are some of those first that they want to do and want to come out. So we have our Puritans, but we also have our separatists who wanted to worship in their own congregations. They didn't want to just be English Protestant. They wanted to be their own type of separatist Protestant church and not be under any type of control of any English church. The reason that some of this causes issues is because in England we have Martin Luther, who begins a Protestant Reformation when he nails his 99 Thesis on the church door. Then John Calvin has a doctrine of predestination, and so we see more splits in these reforms. Then Henry VII will create his own church, which is the Church of England, And when Queen Mary takes over the throne, she will realign the English colonies and England with the Catholic Church, and we start to see a persecution of those who are part of the Church of England or Protestant. And then Queen Elizabeth would then realign with the Church of England when she takes over from Queen Mary. This is Elizabeth I, obviously. And then we see the Catholic Church being persecuted. And so that is another religious incentive, is to get away from the persecution in England and to be able to just worship however you want. And that's where freedom of religion kind of established itself. From here, you are going to watch a few videos over the exploration of the New World and what would be our first 13 colonies with your in-class teacher. I'm going to watch a video on Roanoke and just what happened to that first early settlement of the English. You can decide for yourself what you believe. There are 4 theories, so I want you to make sure you're paying close attention to your video to write those down and to know which ones you think it was. And then you are also going to be moving into a video on the New World. Now, this video isn't only going to talk about exploration and the establishment of English colonies. It's also going to kind of show you a little bit of that tension in England and that internal struggle that was going on in England that encouraged people to move into the New World to get away from what was going on in England. So that's where it's going to start. And then that's going to show you what type of people are in these early settlements, and then it moves into our religious incentives for colonization and things like that. I hope that this lesson hasn't been too awkward. This is my first time recording a video like this. I'm using a light screen on our main campus, so hopefully from here the other units will run a little more smoothly and it won't be as awkward, but I really hope that this has enhanced your learning experience and being able to kind of see some of the things and be able to kind of whiteboard it, I guess. So let me know what you think about this type of instruction. You'll probably use this all semester because I'm going to do all of the units and get them recorded. But if it's not effective, I want to know so that I can change it for our spring semester. So again, I hope you had a great day. Have a great Labor Day weekend, and I will be seeing you for Unit 2.